Thank you. Thank you all for coming. As Danielle said, I'm Justin. I'm the group product manager for Trello now, and was, as Danielle said, part of the original team that started Trello way back in 2011. So today I'm going to walk you through a little bit of how we use Trello at Trello. But before we get there, I want to touch on a couple quick things. I want to give you a little bit of a background on Trello for anybody who maybe hasn't seen it or hasn't used it yet. I want to talk a little bit about how Trello fits in with the rest of the Atlassian product suite. And then I want to tell you a little bit about our team and how our team works, because I think that's actually played a large role in how the product has evolved and what it's used for today. So first, what is Trello? Hopefully you also saw the keynote, and so if you haven't gotten a chance to sign up and play with it yet, maybe you got a bit of an overview there. For anybody who didn't, Trello is a visual collaboration tool that helps create a shared perspective on just about any kind of project. It uses a simple system of boards, lists, and cards to enable you to organize and prioritize your personal and work life in a way that's very fun, flexible, and hopefully even a little bit rewarding. And this is what a Trello board looks like. So this particular board is set up for kind of a standard software development process. You can see on the right, there's a column there for incoming bugs, projects that are in progress, things that are in QA, stuff that's ready to launch, and things that are live. Now, for anybody who uses JIRA, that might kind of look like this for you, and that might leave you wondering, when do I use JIRA? When do I use Trello? How do those two projects fit, or how do those two products fit together? So I'm hopefully going to answer that for you right now, but to do that, I want to take a step back first and tell you a little bit about how we think about the anatomy of a Trello board, because I think that leads into the answer for how those products fit together. So to us, a Trello board has three major components. They're the list and cards, the members, and Powerups. And so I'll take you through each of those now and tell you a little bit about them. So the list and cards to start. Here's that same board. We've got the lists highlighted here, so hopefully you can see them a little bit better. The lists are the gray columns that go vertically. So again, here we have lists for incoming bugs, in progress, QA, ready for launch, and live. Now the cards are the white rounded rectangles there. You can create as many lists as you want. Often in a Trello board, lists will have a workflow to them. So this board kind of has an implied left to right workflow. Work will tend to come in on the left side and move across through the lists until it's finally done. But that's not enforced. You don't have to do it that way. And in fact, lists actually have no real semantic meaning to them. They're just containers of cards in a vertical order. So lists can be topics, they can be categories, they can be whatever you want. And often there'll be a combination of those things. So it's very common for a team to have a list on the left side of their board that says something like resources for this project, and it has links to different things and stuff like that. And then from there, they'll have their workflow that starts after that. Also, lists are very fluid. You're not tied into them. You don't have to predefine that structure at all. And the reality is that lists are often created on the fly and changed often. So in this particular example, maybe you have a PR launch that you're working on with your marketing team, and you want to hold certain features to go out along with some news that's going to be out there. You can very quickly create a list. You just double-click on the board background wherever you want that list to show up, and it'll show up right there. You could double-click on the board background, you say, hold for PR launch. That list will be there. You can drag some cards in there as appropriate. Then when that launch happens, you move them to live, and you can archive that list and get it out there. In this way, your board can flex and evolve with your process very fluidly. So next we have the members. Members are the people that you're collaborating with on this board and on this project that's represented by this board. Here again, you can see them highlighted on the cards. So you can add members to cards, and that does a few things. That puts their face, or their avatar, often a picture of their face, on the front of the card, to show that they're associated with the project that that card represents. It also subscribes them to that card, so they'll get notifications and updates for any changes that are made to that card that they don't make themselves. So often this is used as like an assignment mechanism. So in a workflow like this, probably the people on the front of those cards are assigned to work on that project, and showing them there communicates to everybody, here's the people on this, or the point person for this project, that kind of thing. But again, adding somebody to the card actually has no semantic meaning either. You can use that in different ways. So one example is we have a summer internship program, and we've set up a board that has events on it of things that we want to do with the interns throughout the summer, places we're going to take them, things we're going to show them throughout the city, that kind of stuff. What we like to do is we like to have 4 full-time employees come on those events, and we like to make sure there's at least 4 full-time employees. So we have a board for summer intern events. There's a card per event. It's got all the details, the time, the date, maps, et cetera. And we just add the full-time employees to the cards, or more specifically, they add themselves to the cards for the events that they want to go to. And that way it makes it very easy to visualize, do we have enough people going to every event? It doesn't mean that those people are responsible for planning the event. It doesn't mean that they have to do anything else other than attend, but it lets us visualize that and keep track of that very easily. And so because adding people to cards is such a common thing, we've made that very easy. So here's just a quick example. You can just drag them out from the sidebar and drop them on the card, and they'll stay there. Makes it nice and easy, and again, very visual. So next we have Powerups. Every board has a sidebar that looks like this, and this is where the Powerups are. Now at Trello, we've focused a lot on keeping the core board experience very simple, very easy to get started with, hopefully very easy to understand, and we've made sure that it has all the key features that are common to almost any kind of project. So of course, it's got the lists and cards. It's also got things like due dates, checklists, attachments, conversations, the things that are standard for almost any kind of project, regardless of what kind of team you are. But we recognize at the same time that most projects are going to have the need for a little bit extra. Maybe an extra feature, maybe an integration with another service that that team is using. And so that's where Powerups come in. They're not unlike add-ons for other Atlassian products. One difference is that you turn them on board by board. So you can enable Powerups on your board. For example, in this dev workflow, maybe you want to turn on the JIRA Powerup, the Bitbucket Powerup, and the custom fields, so you can store some custom data on cards. Those Powerups don't automatically show up on any other boards for your team, unless you want them to, but they don't have to. So you can contain the added complexity to just project by project or board by board, which makes it nice because you don't end up with a lot of buttons and a lot of confusing interactions. And in this way, you can take a standard board, which might be a nice way to kind of manage your project, and turn it into this custom application that integrates with other applications and has just the features you want to make it kind of the perfect little tool for your team and your process. So what's really neat about all these things is if you combine them in different ways, you set up your lists differently, you add the right members, you turn on the right Powerups, you can create Trello boards for just about anything, and there's a whole bunch of them scrolling behind me here just to show you some examples. There was a bunch of examples at the keynote today too. But there can be boards that can manage stuff in your personal life. There can be boards that can manage stuff at teams. There's one for marathon training, an architecture firm bidding on a project, meal planning, an IT support workflow, doing your taxes, everybody's favorite thing, planning a wedding. It can really be anything. It's just this structure that you can put together to work on all kinds of different projects. So here we are back to that dev board. Now, often people, especially people from technical backgrounds, when they see Trello for the first time, they think of it like, oh, it's a project management tool, or oh, it's a Kanban tool. And I hope through what I've just talked about that I've convinced you that it's not just those things. It certainly can be used for project management. It can be used for Kanban. We're super happy if you use it for those things. But thinking of it as only a tool for those kind of things is a little bit limiting. So I think of it like this. If you were to say the spreadsheet is a tool for creating a budget, or a word processor is a tool for writing a letter, you can do those things, but you can do so much more. And the flexibility and the range of things that you can do with those tools is really where the power is. So when I think about Trello and JIRA, I think they're actually more complementary than they are competitive in that way. And I like to think about what they're each excellent at to illustrate that point. So JIRA is excellent when you have a project that has a very defined workflow, has a structured process. You want to ensure repeatability, auditability. You want to make sure the steps happen in the right order, by the right people, that kind of thing. Trello, on the other hand, is excellent for processes that are much more fluid, where it's evolving as you go, when you want to get in there and just start collaborating as quickly as you can, start getting ideas down, moving things around. And so the reality is, it's not one or the other. It really depends on what your team is working on and how you want to work on it. And the fact is, even before Trello joined Atlassian, many teams used both JIRA and Trello together. And now, with some of the Powerups and other integrations that we've built since joining, even more teams are doing that. And in that way, when I think about Atlassian's wider mission to unleash the potential of all teams, Trello fits in perfectly with the rest of the product suite. There's unlikely to be one tool that every team is going to use for every kind of project. So Trello fits in with JIRA, Bitbucket, HipChat, Confluence, et cetera, in providing yet another way for teams to collaborate, work together, communicate in a way that meets the way that they like to work. So I'm going to transition now to talking a little bit about the Trello team, because like I said in the beginning, I think that actually plays a huge role in the product and how the product has evolved. This is a snapshot of all the people on the Trello team at the time we joined Atlassian, represented as Trello cards, of course. So Trello started as a project out of Fog Creek Software by a very small team back in early 2011. At the time, we needed a better tool to help us understand at a high level what everybody was working on, how far along it is, what was coming up next. We had different tools, but none of them were really answering that question well for us. We were inspired by a couple things. We were inspired by the fact that everybody in the office had sticky notes all over their wall, all over their whiteboard, and we didn't know why they weren't using digital tools for that stuff. We were also inspired by the ideas of Kanban, but we thought we could simplify, strip away a lot of the rules, and make them more broadly applicable. We built it for ourselves to use first, and we worked on it internally and private for about 9 months, but always with the idea of making a tool that would be publicly available and that would hopefully turn into a business. And so we launched the tool in September 2011, and immediately it caught on. We had a lot of signups, and as you might have heard in the keynote, we're now up to 22 million people signed up to use the product. As that grew and the user base and the enthusiasm for the product grew, we needed to build out the team that was working on it. And so at the time, we made a call to hire remotely. We're headquarters in New York, but we decided that if we could find really great people, we would hire them wherever they were, even if they weren't in New York. And so by the time we joined Atlassian a few months ago, we had about 100 people, a third of whom were in New York, two-thirds of whom were all across the rest of the world, mostly throughout the US, but we have people in Canada, Europe, and South America as well. And so the reason I think this is important is because there's typical standard elements of teamwork that are common to all teams. But I think in an environment like ours, where it's a hybrid, remote, in-person environment, those things are even more important, because you can't rely on sort of the ambient communication that happens when you happen to get coffee at the same time, or as somebody else, or pass them in the hall, that kind of a thing. So we've been very intentional about how we've approached onboarding new people and getting them up to speed, managing work and projects, communicating and holding meetings, and managing everybody's personal productivity to ensure that they have the right context and the right information to make smart decisions and do good work, even if they're not in the office with everybody. We rely on Trello heavily for all of these things, and our need to do that and the way we do that has evolved the product to a few common principles that I'd like to talk about. If I had to put a theme over all these principles, it would be the idea that Trello should bend itself to work the way you want to work, rather than forcing you to change the way you want to work to match the tool. So those principles quickly are that Trello is going to work on every device. It works in your web browser, it works on your tablet, on your phone, on your watch. It's going to be translated into 21 languages on all those different devices. And on the mobile devices, it'll work whether you have an internet connection or not. If you're offline, it will sync up later. It has real-time updates. So again, we're trying to give you this perspective over your projects. And if you feel like you constantly have to refresh to get the latest version, that's not giving you the right kind of perspective. That doesn't give you trust in the tool, that you know what's going on. So Trello updates in real time. If you have a board, and somebody makes a change on that board while you're looking at it, you'll see that change immediately. It'll happen on your phone, web browser, et cetera. We believe that there should be minimal configuration. We want to just get you straight in there, collaborating and working with other people. The things that you might want to configure, the lists, the setup, the workflow, the other settings, the power-ups, those things you can do on the fly. And when you do them, you tend to do them in context. So if you want to change the name of the list, you just click on the name of the list and type a new name. If you want to change the power-ups, you just go to the side by the board and change the power-ups. It's all right there in the board. There's not a lot of preferences and settings and that sort of stuff. And we intentionally built it to be incredibly flexible. So again, we focused on really building the things that are common to all projects, making them incredibly easy to use, very intuitive, very broadly applicable, and letting people combine them in different ways to work on different kinds of things. So with all that in mind, let's talk about how we use Trello at Trello. Now, some people sometimes mistake that idea of that flexibility, that simplicity, that ease of use to mean that it's a basic tool, a starter tool that you'll eventually want to graduate out of. But I think that's actually one of the strengths. And I think we've spent a lot of time figuring out how we add that richness and that extra power under the hood in a way that doesn't make it more complicated or harder to understand. And hopefully I'll be able to show you that in some of these examples. We use Trello for literally everything. We run the whole company on Trello. We have hundreds of boards. But I'll take you through a few that I think hopefully will be interesting to you and try to point out some kind of pro tips and techniques and tricks and stuff along the way to make you into a Trello power user. So the first one here is a board that our systems team uses, or our SRE team, our systems reliability engineering team. It looks like this. This is an example board. It's not the real board, but it's based on the real board. Things to think about here. Like I was saying earlier, still a left to right workflow. Work tends to come in on the left side of the board, move across it as it goes. They use a thing that we call internally a rainbow card. It's just a regular card, but it's the top left card there that has those 4 colored bars on it. People tend to use that very commonly. I see this when I talk to customers. They tend to do this too. It's just a trend. There's nothing about Trello that forces you into doing this or anything, but it actually tends to work pretty well. What it is, it's basically a README file for this board. People put that card up there. They put the labels on it to call it out. If this is the first time you've come to this board, if you're a new member of the team, or it's the first time that you're interacting with this team, you can open up that card. It'll explain the workflow on this board, how to use it, where to go for different things. It makes it easy to get started with this board if it's the first time you've seen it. The other thing that you can see here is that they add people to cards. You can see the faces on the cards. It starts in the next up list. If you notice, the first 2 lists don't have any people on them. What that means is that by the time a card is ready, by the time a project is ready to be worked on and it's next up, they make sure that there's a point person on there. And then you know who to talk to if you have a question about that or you want to know more about that project, you know who to talk to. When you open up a card, you can see some of the details. So this is one of those cards opened up. I can see here quickly that Quentin and Chad are working on the card. They've started to have a little bit of conversation about what's going on this project. There's not a ton here because this one's next up. But you can see that this is where you would bring things. This is going to become your central routing point for this project. It will link you out to code, to files, to if there's graphic assets or other things like that. This is where you'll find all about that. If you can see on the right side there of the card, there's the Powerups section on the sidebar. I can see from this that there's at least 5 Powerups turned on in this board. You can see Bitbucket, Confluence, and JIRA. Also Card Repeater and Card Snooze are 2 that they're using here. Those Powerups enable more functionality that, as I was saying before, gives you more richness and more features on this board. So here's an example of another card that's making use of the Bitbucket Powerup. And what you can see here is that you can attach pull requests, branches, and commits to cards. When you do, you get this section in the center of the back of the card that links out to that stuff. Our philosophy on this kind of stuff with Trello is that we want to link you to the work that you have in other systems, and we want to give you a little bit of perspective into that work directly in Trello. But we're not trying to replicate or replace that system or that tool. So here you can see there's a pull request and there's a branch attached. I can see a little bit of information. I can see who last worked on those. For the pull request, I can see sort of the branches that are involved. I can see how many comments there were. And there's little green badges under each of those. Those badges are telling me that the build steps passed. If there was a red badge, I would know that one of the build steps failed, at least one, and I can click through directly to Bitbucket to look into that in more depth if I think I can fix it or I want to know why. Another cool thing about this board is if I scroll it all the way to the right here, they have a list on the right side called recurring. And what they've put in there is a card per quarter for the quarterly access checks that they run. What they do is they've set up the card repeater power up here to schedule those cards to be moved back into the next up list. So these are things that they run quarter after quarter. They're pretty much the same every time, but they need to remember to do them at the right times. Trello automates that process. The cool thing about this is the card itself is just a regular card. So you can attach files, you can put checklists on there, anything that you could do to a normal card, and those things will be copied off over with it when the card recurs, which is just a nice way to get going with that project. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. It'll just show up. It can notify you if you want it to. And it really makes things sort of simple and automated in a nice way. I don't know if you noticed in the beginning, but there was a requests and inquiries list. This team has a little bit of a reactive workflow where people from outside the team are asking them to do things. And so sometimes the cards in that list are coming from elsewhere. So we spent a lot of time trying to hone the process of getting cards into Trello to make it as easy as possible. Here's one example where if you have like a spreadsheet or a document that has a whole bunch of items in it, you can just copy them all at once and paste them in. Trello will recognize the new lines and ask you if you want 30 cards or just one, and you can just hit enter and it'll create them all at the same time for you. It's just little time-saving things for getting this stuff into Trello that make it easier to work on. Another thing you can do here is if you have, every board has an email address. So if you have a workflow that involves email, whether people are emailing you personally, or you might want to give this address out to people who might want to ask you to do things, you can set it up so that emails that come into this address will create cards in the list that you want them to create cards in. And what will happen is the subject of that email will become the name of the card, the body of the email will become the card description, and any files attached will be attached to the card. So that's another nice way to get stuff out of your inbox, out of email, in the context of everything else that you're working on, in a way to just make it nice and easy. So as I said in the beginning, though, Trello is not just for technical teams. I just spent a bunch of time talking about technical projects. Let's look at some non-technical teams that we have at the company and how they use Trello. Our marketing team has had a lot of success using it as an editorial calendar. And here's a board that represents how they do that. Similar things as you've seen for other boards. There's, again, a left to right workflow. In this case, very different kinds of lists, researching ideas that are being figured out, writing, editing, making graphics, and ready for publishing. One of the things you'll notice about this board is they make use of the labels. That's little colored tabs on the top of each card. They use the labels on this team to represent areas of content. They have different goals around a certain amount of content for different content areas that they want to focus on. This makes it very easy to visualize which content areas they have represented in which stages of the pipeline, so they can make sure they're representing that balance appropriately. Another thing you can notice is as the cards move across, again, left to right, they tend to accumulate stuff. So if you can see the little gray text and the gray icons below the names of the cards, we call those badges. They give you a little sneak peek into what's on the back of the card. And so you can start to see that as the cards move across, they tend to get more attachments, more comments, more, they have checklists on them, and the checklists get more complete. They have due dates applied to them, that kind of thing. So as the cards move across, you can start to see what's happening there. The due date badges, the checklist badges turn green when all the checklist items have been checked off. So you can see in Ready for Publishing, all the cards have checklist badges that are green. If you ever had a card in that list and the checklist wasn't complete, that should be probably a flag that you might want to look at. So if you don't see that green badge in that list, that's something that should be looked into. Now, due dates are particularly important. This being an editorial calendar, they have to have content coming out on certain days. And so it's not so easy in this view to say, what's coming out tomorrow, and is it ready? You'd have to kind of search around for the right due date. So we have a calendar power-up that you can use, and that looks like this. If you open up the calendar power-up over a board, it gives you the calendar grid representation of your cards. This makes it very easy to answer that question of, do we have the right content for tomorrow? The cool thing about this, too, is you can drag cards from day to day. If you want to change the date, you just drag it to a new day. It'll automatically change. It lets you, again, see with the labels here, do we have the right content types represented every week? Do we have duplicate content? Do we have gaps? Any of that kind of stuff. Makes it very easy and fluid. One of the other things that's cool that this team pioneered at the company, and a lot of other teams have picked up since then, is the idea of a meeting agenda list. So they call their list This Week, and they include it all the way on the right side of their board. And what this is that they have a weekly status meeting for the team, where all the team members come. And they talk about, projects that are going on, issues that have come up, questions, pretty standard team stuff. Our team being a remote team, sometimes it's not as easy to just ask those questions because you're not, again, walking past people in the hall or getting coffee together. So what they did was they created this list. People add cards throughout the week if they have something they want to talk about. And what it does is it creates sort of a collaborative agenda that you can go through when the meeting comes around. And this is nice in and of itself. Everybody knows that meetings without agendas tend to drag on and go over and be a waste of time. So this at least puts structure around that meeting. The part that's really great is what often ends up happening is that people will see these cards come up and they will jump in there and leave a comment that answers the question or that addresses the issue. And when that happens, you can just close out the card. You actually don't need to talk about that at the meeting at all. And so that saves you even more time at the meeting. And then what ends up happening more often than you might expect is there's actually no cards left by the time the meeting rolls around, and then you just don't have the meeting, and everybody gets an extra hour to go do something important. And that saves everybody a ton of time. And all of our teams have adopted this, and it's actually been huge. So another example, another non-technical example, our recruiting team manages their recruiting pipeline through Trello. And they have a board that looks like this. It's sort of a workflow. There is a kind of a transition of cards across this board, but it's also a little bit of a resource. As a hiring manager, it's nice to come in here and understand, what are the roles that we have open, what are the roles that we're looking to put up soon, which roles have been closed out. that kind of thing. It gives you a nice bird's eye view of what's going on there. One of the things that has worked really well for us here is if you look at that top left card in the future needs list, which is the leftmost list, it says template, any new role. So what the team has done is they've created a card that has the basics that you would need for any new role. So in the description, they use Markdown in the description to create the bold and the list items and that kind of stuff. In the description, there's sort of some fields that you would fill out, the name of the role, the team contact, the lead recruiter, et cetera. And then there's a checklist of all the steps that you would have to go through to get that role ready to post. You might have to come up with an interview pipeline, that kind of stuff. So as a hiring manager, if you go in there, maybe as a VP of product, you want to hire a mobile product manager, you go in there, you open this card up, there's a copy functionality, you just copy the card, call it mobile product manager. It's going to have all this stuff on the card, and then you can just start right from there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. You don't have to, remember all the steps. You don't get to the point where there's a lot of back and forth, like, hey, did you remember this? Oh yeah, I forgot. What about this? It keeps everything nice and consistent and ensures that we're maintaining quality with our posts, but without putting a lot of heavyweight process on top. It's very lightweight and very flexible. Sort of along the same lines, and this was one of the examples that Michael pointed out in the keynote earlier, we use it for our new employee onboarding as well. And so that board looks like this. It's got things that new employees will do on the first day, things they'll do in the first week, stuff they've done, different resources, who to talk to about what, different policies we have and things like that, cultural information. Every new employee who starts at Trello gets one of these boards specifically for them. And the way that works is somebody on our people team creates a copy of this whole board. And they call it, say, John Smith onboarding, if John Smith were starting next week. And then they add John to the board. And he's going to get a board that looks like this. He can go through it. Really, the kind of secret sauce that we figured out on this board is the last step, the last thing that you have to do in your first week is you go back to the template and you update it to include anything that was missing or anything that was confusing or anything that's changed. And in that way, we can ensure that every new employee at the company has an even better onboarding experience than the last one. We also have our employee manual in Trello. This is just a quick example, but I just want to show you this because it's actually not a workflow at all. The cards don't tend to move from list to list at all. It's just a nice visual representation of a lot of information. Things about benefits, vacation policies, conferences, travel, expense policies, et cetera. And it's just a nice, easy way to keep track of that information. It links out to other documents and things as appropriate. You can download forms if you need to, but it's all right here and easy to visualize. Now, you might have noticed, too, that all these boards have images as backgrounds, and we do that partially because it's cool and it's fun, but it's also useful. So if I zoom in on the Chrome tabs, Chrome will actually take that background and put it in the favicon so that you can see when you have a bunch of Chrome tabs open which board is which. And if you're like me and you like to pin your tabs to the point where it shows the icon but not the name, it makes it very easy to know which board is which. So now I'm going to take a couple minutes and talk about personal productivity. And this section has a lot to do with my personal philosophy on productivity. You could do it differently, but I like to talk about this because I think it shows how you can really customize Trello to fit the way you want to work. So this is a screenshot of my own personal board that I use every day. It's not collaborative. I'm the only person on this board. But my personal philosophy on productivity is I like to see everything in one place. So I've set this up so that, of course, I can create cards for things that I want to remember to do and projects that I have to work on. I also have it pipe in all of the meetings on my calendar, all the emails that I need to respond to, and HipChat messages that I need to respond to. And in that way, I take the train into work every day. I can sit on the train for 10 minutes, and I can prioritize these things. I put them in the list of stuff I want to do today, stuff I want to do tomorrow, and stuff that I'm going to do later. And this has avoided that situation where I sit down to finally work on that key project, only to realize that I have a meeting that starts 10 minutes later, and I'm not going to get anywhere on it. So the way I've done this is a few different things. I have a programming background, so I've used our API. We have an API where you can do a ton of stuff. So I've written some custom stuff on top of our API to do this. Our API is very fully featured. Our web app and mobile apps use the public API. So pretty much anything you can do in our apps, anything you see us doing, you can do via our API too. We also have a Zapier Powerup now. I don't know if anybody's used Zapier. It's kind of a service that automates connections between other services. So you can say, if this event happens over here, do this over here. So I use that to do things like 24 hours before I have a meeting on my calendar, create a card for me for that meeting. And what it'll do is it'll set the due date for the meeting time, It'll add the meeting description as the card description, and any links in there will be preserved. So like sometimes we have a meeting in a video chat, and I can just click the link right from the card. I have it set up so whenever I flag an email, it pulls that in too. And that way I know that, hey, that's an email I got to get back to. Maybe it requires me to read something in depth or give a more in-depth response. And I also have it set up to pull hip chat messages in too. So if I get one when I'm on the go and I don't have time to respond right now, it's easy to remember to go back to that. The other thing I like to do is use Trello for one-on-ones with all the members of my team. Like I said a few times now, we have a remote team, and so I don't always see those people every day. And so we create a board like this for me and each person on my team. And this is basically our shared scratch pad for keeping notes and keeping track of what we need to talk about in our one-on-ones. And so what I do is I subscribe to these boards. I mentioned in the beginning when you get added to a card, that automatically subscribes you to a card. You can also subscribe to whole lists or whole boards. And if you do, you'll get notified about anything that happens in that list or on the entire board. So I subscribe to this whole board, and that means that any changes that are made by the other person on the board, not me, I'll get notified by. And I can choose if I want those in the mobile app or email or whatever. So what we do is on these boards, if there's something I want to discuss in our next one-on-one, I'll create a card and add a little description about it just to give them a heads up, like, hey, I want to talk about this thing. Likewise, if there's anything they want to discuss, they can do the same thing. If there's things that we talk about but we need to follow up on again, maybe we said, hey, we want to make sure that you're doing more of X, more public speaking in this next quarter. We can keep that in the need follow-up list, and we can kind of check in on it periodically and say, hey, are we getting towards that goal? Is that working for us? And it also keeps an ongoing list of the things that we've accomplished. I think it's kind of nice to be able to see the things that you completed and remember how far you've come. And so this tends to kind of be a combination of a collaborative agenda and collaborative meeting minutes all rolled into one. And it's a really nice way for us to stay on the same page and kind of know what each other are thinking in a way that's not a lot of fuss and not a lot of overhead, but keeps things simple. So anyway, that's like 6 or 7 boards that we use at Trello. Like I said in the beginning, we have literally hundreds. And so you might start to wonder how we keep track of all those things and how we stay on top of that. There's a couple ways. I mentioned the subscriptions, and sort of tuning in what you're subscribed to and what you're not helps a lot. The other thing is I use personally this board view a lot. So this is a team board view. So these are all the boards in this team. This particular team has business class, which is a paid upgrade to the free teams. With business class, you get a couple things. You get collections, which let you group those boards. So I tend to go in and I'll look at boards for the people on my team. So that might be like our mobile team boards, our new user experience team boards, our enterprise team boards. These are people who are doing stuff on the product, and they might have a few different boards that they're doing things across. You can also sort the boards in different ways. So I tend to prefer sorting them by most recently active. So I'll go in, I'll say, what's the new user experience team worked on? What's the most recent board that's changed? Okay, let me go in and see what's happening there. And that helps me stay abreast of what's happening. Now, we've put in a lot of effort into documenting these things. We've mentioned most of the examples I just talked about and a whole lot more. There's a website at trello.com/teams that you can check out if you want to see more about that, or you want more in-depth explanations of how those different flows work for all kinds of teams, from sales teams to technical teams, marketing teams, support teams, etc. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it. Happy to. Thank you.